And good afternoon, morning. Wait, you see, this is so confusing for us. Sometimes, when you're used to doing a live show, you can go ahead and say, hey, good morning. It's 10 minutes past the hour of 9 o'clock, or 10 minutes past the hour if you don't want to be specific on time zones. But we know so many of you watch these on YouTube and on our blog after the fact, so we don't want to give you a time warp there. We'll just say hi and welcome back to Inside on Business. My name is Michael Libbie. All of this is powered by our advertising agency, Inside Advertising, Marketing, and Communications. We're an ad agency based here in Des Moines, a full-service agency from video to social media to print. Whatever it is that you're doing, we can help you sell more of it. I've had the pleasure of knowing Larry Cleverley for several years. And this is the first time he's been in studio with me. And so this is, I suspect, going to be a wide-ranging discussion on some of his belief systems when it comes to food and eating. It's so basic to all of us. Larry, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. We've talked about this several times in the past.
Sure.
Glad you could make it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, you've got this great look about you with the hair.
Well, I guess I had long hair back in the early '70s, and it seems to have made a return here in the new decade.
Are you a flower child?
Of sorts.
Day?
I was in college from '69 to '73,
so
that
me
was.
Too, yeah.
There were a lot of social upheavals occurring at that time, and I participated in some of them.
You never quite leave that activist role, do you?
Apparently not.
Before we get into our interview with Larry, we want to show you this quick video because it gives a little bit of backstory about what it is that Larry does at Cleverley Farms. This was done a couple of years ago by our mutual friend, Ken Root. Ken is a longtime broadcaster and good friend, and he did this video, and Larry said, I didn't even know it existed up until just about 6 months ago. But it's a nice piece done by Ken that kind of gives you the overview of Larry Cleverley and Cleverley Farms. Ryan, can we go ahead and roll that?
Larry Cleverley is out early every morning from spring to fall. He makes his livelihood from a few acres of intensively grown vegetable crops on a hillside just off the diagonal highway near Mingo. The squash are blooming with the hope of one more crop before winter. He grows heirloom varieties of tomatoes that vary in color from yellow to neon green to muted shades of red and purple. His forte is a wide assortment of lettuce and other greens. The seed comes from Italy, and he's found a niche with area restaurants who want to serve locally grown yet exotic salads.
We get good shelf life out of our products from the restaurants. If we're selling 10 pounds of arugula to Centro, we're going to cut it that morning, we're going to deliver it that afternoon. They're going to go through it in a couple of days, and then we're going to bring them 10 more pounds.
Larry's workers have gravitated to him from the restaurant business. First-generation immigrants from Guatemala who work early in the field and late in the kitchen. The greens are cut by hand, then transferred to the packing shed to be washed and dried. He has a salad spinner on steroids. The mixture of lettuce varieties is labeled and cooled to soon be delivered to restaurants who will use them for the evening meal. Larry Cleverley hasn't always been a vegetable grower. He had a career in marketing and lived in Chicago and New York City for many years. He came back to Iowa and learned how to grow a quality product for his customers. He is a dependable supplier with lots of marketing savvy.
We're like any other company. We try to do good service. We try to have a high quality product at a fair price.
Pretty nice, huh? Larry Cleverley from Cleverley Farms. So, Larry, Ken Root came out and shot that for you. Very nicely done.
Right?
Yeah, he always does a good job. So tell me, on the way into the studio today, I was listening to the crop report, USDA crop report, and they're talking about corn and soybeans for the most part, row crops. And this guy was on.
Pretty much all they have to
pretty
talk
much
about.
all they talk about, yeah. And this guy was on saying, yeah, we should have our 1,100 acres of corn and soybeans planted in about 1 week. And for most Iowans, for most individuals, whether they're city or country, that's the view of agriculture that they have.
Sure.
is large production agriculture, whether it be animal agriculture or crops, row crops.
It's what people see every day when they're driving down the highways.
Exactly, and those big green machines.
Sure.
Tell me about your farm.
Well,
Is it first of all, is it 1,100 acres?
no, the farm is about 230 acres.
Right.
And 8 acres of that we have vegetables. I have about 100 acres of timber, a little over 100 acres of cropland that we rent out to a neighbor who does corn and beans.
So your income doesn't come from timber, I don't imagine.
No.
No. But there is a little bit of money on a cash rent basis coming for your 100 acres.
Yeah.
So you're making a living, for the most part, on 8 acres of land.
That's true.
How in the hell do you do that?
Well, I mean, it's very intensive farming, totally different than the monocropping that we were just talking about. One of the most difficult things for me coming into this business 17 years ago was, I grew up on a farm just across the road from where my wife and I now live. And one of the most difficult things was learning that we didn't just plant in the springtime and harvest in the fall. We plant every week and pretty much harvest every day. And so the crops are dense, they're high value, relative to corn and beans per acre. So we're looking to gross $10,000 to $12,000 an acre off these crops, which sounds like a lot of money until
However, you've also got the work-related
It's a lot
costs.
of labor involved. Organic farming is very labor intensive, especially on a small scale like we do it.
Now, have you always been a farmer, Larry?
No, I've like I said, I grew up on a farm. So I spent the first 21 years of my life in Iowa. And when I got out of college in 1973, I could not wait to get out of Iowa. Des Moines at that time was a city that held no interest to me at all. And I moved to Chicago, where I had some friends from college. There was, of course, a woman involved, as there usually is.
Yeah.
And I spent from 1973 till early 81 in Chicago. I got a job with Rockwell International with their graphic systems division in their finance department. And then in 1981, I was given the opportunity to move to New York City. I could have gone to LA or New York. I knew there was more business coming out of New York. I found New York more appealing.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Figured I would move there for 5 years. It was like a resume building experience. But what ended up happening was my wife and I fell in love with New York City, and we stayed 16 years and moved back to Iowa on Thanksgiving of 1996.
That living in New York City had to have an adjustment time for you. I mean, that's, Chicago to New York City is still, Iowa to Chicago is, okay, we got it. But even Chicago to New York City, that's a cultural change.
I looked at it almost like 8 years in Chicago was boot camp for moving to New York City. Because I remember very clearly my first day driving to work in Chicago. And I was probably going 25 miles an hour in a right-hand lane of I-55, hoping that no one hit me and I didn't hit anyone else. And then when I moved to New York, it was like moving to a foreign country.
Yeah.
Because here I am, I'm in a new job, with the same company, but nonetheless a new job. I'm living in a hotel. I'm looking for an apartment. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to fit into this giant city, and it was a little overwhelming. But bit by bit, I became accustomed to it.
The cultural interaction must have been amazing, though.
It was astounding.
Yeah.
Just so many different people. So many different cultural attractions. Anything you want is basically right outside your door, and I have to think that we took pretty good advantage of that for the 16 years we lived there.
Anything of that experience, Larry, stick with you when you came back to Iowa to start this farming business? the interaction that you had in other cultural foods and other cultural aspects of locally grown produce, was that something that kind of touched you there?
Well, one of the things that I was able to do living in New York, and then my last several years in Chicago as well, is in Chicago I was the national credit manager for this division of Rockwell my last several years there. So I spent a lot of time on the road. And, back in the late 70s, expense accounts were, very commonplace, and unlimited expense accounts were fairly commonplace too. And so I got to take advantage of that by trying a lot of food that I had never seen before. And then in New York, the food choices are just overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so we saw things and ate things that the average Iowan, just hadn't had an opportunity to taste. And so we brought those food values back to Iowa with us. And when we went to the first farmers market in 1997, and people saw arugula for the first time. They saw fingerling potatoes for the first time. They saw the French green beans, haricots verts, for the first time. Heirloom tomatoes. Just product after product after product. And a lot of people laughed at what we had to show them. I only grew maybe 50 pounds of fingerling potatoes our first year, and I'm pretty sure I carried them back and forth to the farmer's market for about a month before I finally called one of my...
their shelf life.
Finally called one of my 2 restaurant customers at that time and said, hey, would you be interested in some fingerling potatoes? And he offered me more for them than I was trying to get for them at the farmer's market. And so we just built, on having good tasting food, even though it was unfamiliar to the majority of our potential customers.
And that was in the early years, and look how things have changed with the downtown farmers market and a host of other things. When we come back with Larry Cleverley, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at where does he sell this stuff at? In his mind, is it better to niche yourself in one area? And this has something to do with anybody that has to have a business. If you've got a business, do you just niche yourself in one area, or do you spread the thing out and diversify a little bit? He doesn't just grow garlic. We'll find out what other things that he does grow and how he markets and sells this. And this is all important to whatever business you're in. You know that it is. Larry Cleverley from Cleverley Farms when we come back.